She raised her glass high, her smile gleaming under the restaurant's golden light. "Here's to new beginnings," my wife Laura declared. The table erupted with applause and laughter, her friends clinking their glasses against hers as though the whole room belonged to her. I sat quietly, my hand resting on the stem of my wine glass, watching her bask in the moment. Nobody at that table knew what I had tucked inside the envelope resting against my leg. Nobody but me. They thought I was simply the quiet husband, the steady shadow in the background of her bright celebration. They had no idea what was about to happen when the check arrived. Before I go further, make sure you subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my place? The evening had started with the kind of glamour Laura lived for. She had chosen one of the trendiest places downtown, a restaurant where the walls were lined with mirrors and the chandeliers cast soft golden light across polished tables. She wore a dark emerald dress that shimmered when she moved, her blonde hair curled perfectly around her shoulders. She had spent weeks planning this dinner, inviting her closest friends, Mark and Emily from her office, Claire from her yoga class, and a few others I had only seen in passing. They all came bearing gifts wrapped in silver paper and bottles of wine more expensive than the meal itself. I sat at the far end of the table, listening as they reminisced about office parties, yoga retreats, and stories I had no part in. The conversations floated past me, laughter rolling over me like waves. I smiled when expected, nodded when appropriate, but inside, every word scraped against me. Laura never once turned to me during her stories, never once included me in the laughter. It was as if I were a guest at my own wife's celebration. The waiter moved with precision, pouring champagne into tall glasses, delivering plates of seared salmon and steak that smelled of butter and garlic. Laura laughed louder than anyone else, her hand brushing Mark's arm when he told a joke, her head tilting toward Emily when she whispered something meant to exclude me. I noticed everything. My silence wasn't ignorance, it was deliberate. I wanted every detail burned into my memory, every gesture seared into my mind. By the time dessert was served, a tower of chocolate cake with sparklers shooting light into the air, the energy at the table was electric. Laura thrived in it, her laughter ringing louder than the crackle of the sparklers. She stood, lifting her champagne glass high above her head. "Tonight," she announced, her voice commanding attention, "is not just my birthday. Tonight is the start of a new chapter in my life. A new beginning." The table roared with cheers, clinking glasses, applause. Someone shouted, "To Laura!" and they all echoed it, raising their glasses higher. I lifted mine too, but not to drink, only to mask the faintest smile that tugged at the corner of my mouth. When Laura's eyes met mine across the table, I saw no acknowledgement, no warmth, only triumph. And in that moment, I knew my timing was perfect. The restaurant buzzed with warmth and chatter, but inside me there was only stillness. I sat back, letting the noise of laughter and clinking glasses blur into the background, my eyes fixed on Laura as she soaked in the spotlight she had created. She leaned toward her friends with a glow that looked rehearsed, her hand moving theatrically as she told a story from her office about how she was finally taking control of her life. Every word was calculated to make her the heroine, the one who had outgrown the rest of us. They nodded along, enchanted by her energy, blind to the cracks beneath the surface. I had been married to her for 20 years. I knew every tell, every shift in her tone, every glance that revealed what she didn't dare say out loud. When she looked past me, when her eyes slid over me as though I were invisible, I knew exactly what she was celebrating. The waiter appeared again, refilling glasses and setting down another round of appetizers for the table. I thanked him softly, while Laura didn't pause in her story to acknowledge his presence. She laughed at her own punchline, her voice loud enough to carry across the dining room. A couple at a nearby table turned to look, but she didn't notice or care. Her friends adored her, hanging on each word as if she were the only person in the room worth listening to. I watched her, the way her smile stretched wide, the way her eyes darted toward Mark a little too often, the way her hand lingered on her glass like it was part of the performance. I thought about the years that had led us here, The compromises, the late nights, the mornings when she was already halfway out the door before I'd had my first sip of coffee. The times she dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand, telling me I was too serious, too cautious, too much. I had swallowed it all, convincing myself that marriage was about patience, about loyalty, about waiting for the storms to pass. But tonight wasn't a storm. Tonight was a declaration, one she made loudly and proudly while I sat a few feet away, treated like an afterthought. The envelope in my jacket pocket felt heavier with every passing minute. I could feel its edges pressing against my side, sharp reminders of the decision I had already made. I had signed every page carefully, my signature steady even as my chest tightened. I had folded the papers neatly, slid them into the envelope without a second thought. And now, sitting at the table with Laura and her friends, I could almost hear the clock ticking down to the moment when it would no longer be a secret. Emily raised her glass again, her cheeks flushed from the champagne. "To Laura!" she shouted, repeating the toast, and the table followed suit. I lifted my glass slowly, meeting Laura's eyes across the flickering candlelight. She looked radiant, triumphant, like a woman who believed she had outgrown the life we had built together. She smirked faintly, as though my quiet presence only confirmed her belief that I didn't belong in her new chapter. The plates were cleared, the sparklers from the cake had burned out, and the waiter returned with the check neatly tucked into a leather folder. He placed it gently at the edge of the table, between Laura and me. The conversation dipped for a moment, the group exchanging glances, waiting for me to reach for it like I always did. That was my role, after all, the reliable husband who paid, who stayed silent, who played his part without complaint. I let the moment stretch. I didn't reach for the folder. Instead, I took a slow sip of water, my eyes locked on Laura's. She tilted her head, the faintest trace of annoyance flashing across her face. Finally, with a sigh, I leaned forward, sliding the envelope from my pocket. My fingers brushed the folder briefly, but instead of pulling it closer, I placed the envelope neatly on top. Its white surface stood out starkly against the dark leather, and for a heartbeat the entire table seemed to pause, caught between laughter and silence. Laura's smile faltered. She looked down at the envelope, her brow furrowing as though her brain hadn't caught up with what her eyes were seeing. Her friends glanced at each other, confusion spreading like a ripple across the table. The waiter hovered nearby, sensing the sudden shift in the air. I sat back in my chair, calm, unhurried, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The envelope remained there, quiet but undeniable, as the noise of the restaurant carried on around us. For the first time that evening, Laura's confidence slipped. She reached toward it slowly, her hand hesitant, the laughter at the table fading into uneasy silence. All eyes turned to her, waiting, watching. She had wanted to be the center of attention, and now she was, just not in the way she had planned. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The moment had arrived, and the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Laura's hand hovered over the envelope as though it might burn her fingers. The sparkle that had danced in her eyes all evening was gone, replaced by a flicker of something rawer. Fear, confusion, a dawning awareness that the night was not going to end the way she had planned. Her friends leaned in slightly, curiosity written across their faces. The restaurant's low hum of clinking glasses and polite laughter seemed distant now, as if we were sealed inside a bubble where only the envelope mattered. She finally picked it up, her manicured fingers sliding beneath the flap with a hesitation I had never seen in her before. She pulled the papers halfway out, her lips parting as she scanned the bold heading at the top of the first page. The word divorce stared back at her, sharp and undeniable under the warm glow of the chandelier. Her mouth opened as though to laugh, to turn it into some kind of cruel joke, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted toward me, searching for an explanation, a denial, anything that could make this moment less real. I met her gaze steadily, my expression calm, unreadable, offering her no escape. The silence stretched so long it became deafening. Emily's nervous laugh broke through first, high-pitched and strained. "Is this a prank?" she asked, her eyes flicking between us. Mark shifted in his chair, his smile fading, his brow furrowed. Claire whispered something under her breath, though her voice was drowned out by the sudden stillness of everyone else. Even the waiter who had been standing discreetly nearby couldn't help but glance at the scene, sensing the shift from celebration to collapse. Laura slammed the papers back onto the table as though the sound might erase what they said. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I reached for my wallet, pulled out a stack of bills, and placed them neatly beside the check folder. The gesture was deliberate, final, a signal that the evening was ending whether she wanted it to or not. Her friends stared, their eyes wide, caught between loyalty and shock. They had come to celebrate her, to toast her new beginnings. And now they sat frozen in a scene none of them could have imagined. Laura's face flushed red, her hands shaking as she gathered the papers again, flipping through them as though the words might change. "You can't just do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. But I could, and I had. I stood slowly, pushing back my chair. The sound of the legs scraping against the polished floor seemed to echo louder than any toast. I slid my wallet back into my pocket, straightened my jacket, and looked down at her one last time. She was still clutching the papers, her eyes wide, her mouth trembling, her carefully crafted mask crumbling in front of her friends. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't give her the drama she might have expected. Instead, I spoke with the same calm tone I had carried all evening. "Happy birthday, Laura." The words cut sharper than any raised voice could have. Around the table, no one moved, no one spoke. They just watched, their faces pale in the warm light, as I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard her voice crack, calling my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I moved through the restaurant, past tables filled with strangers who glanced up at the shift in energy but quickly looked away. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter returned gradually as I reached the door, but it was muffled, distant, like the world was already moving on. Outside, the night air was cool, crisp against my skin. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Cars passed by with their headlights glowing, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange lightness settle over me. The envelope was no longer mine to carry. The burden was gone, left behind on that table where she had raised her glass to new beginnings. She had wanted a new chapter. I had given her one, but it wasn't the story she had planned to write. The night air followed me home like a companion, cool and unrelenting, as if the world itself wanted to remind me that something had ended and something else had begun. I drove in silence, the city lights flashing across the windshield, my hands steady on the wheel. No music, no radio, just the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of my breathing. My phone buzzed once, then again, until the vibration became a constant presence in the console. I didn't need to look to know who it was. I let it ring. I let every call go unanswered. That silence was the only answer I had left to give her. When I reached the house, it felt different. The lights were still on in the living room, the faint glow seeping through the blinds, but instead of comfort, it looked like an empty stage waiting for a play that would never be performed again. I walked inside and left my keys on the counter, taking in the familiar scent of home. Leather from the old couch, lavender from the candle Laura always insisted on burning. All of it felt hollow now, like props from a life that no longer belonged to me. I sat down, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the photographs on the wall. Vacations, family gatherings, birthdays, all smiles, all carefully arranged moments. They were snapshots of a marriage that had once been real, then slowly turned into something posed, something hollow. I wondered if anyone at that dinner table had seen the cracks before tonight, if they had noticed the way Laura's laugh always rang a little too loud, or the way her eyes never quite softened when she looked at me anymore. Probably not. Most people don't look for the truth when the surface shines so brightly. Another call buzzed through, then another. I turned the phone face down on the table. The sound was nothing more than noise now. Outside, the street was quiet, and inside, for the first time in years, there was peace. Heavy, unfamiliar, but peace nonetheless. Hours passed. At some point, I drifted into sleep on the couch, the glass still half full on the table beside me. When I woke, The sun was already creeping through the blinds, painting streaks of light across the floor. My phone was still lit with missed calls, a list so long it nearly filled the screen. There were also messages. Long, desperate ones, shorter, angry ones. Some just silence in the form of dots that had never turned into words. I didn't open them. I stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to let the sunlight flood the room. The neighborhood was already awake. Kids riding their bikes down the sidewalk, a neighbor walking his dog, the world carrying on without pause. Life didn't wait for anyone. Not for me, not for Laura, not for the marriage that had ended over the course of one dinner. That thought steadied me. By noon, I had packed a bag. Not much, just the essentials. A few shirts, my laptop, a stack of papers I had been meaning to go through for months. I left everything else where it was. The furniture, the photos, the carefully arranged decorations. Laura had chosen to make the house look like the ones in magazines. Let her keep them. Let her sit among them, surrounded by the life she had tried so hard to polish while the foundation beneath it crumbled. When I walked out the door with my bag slung over my shoulder, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was clarity. For too long, I had let her define the narrative of our life, her laughter drowning out my silence, her stories eclipsing my truth. But last night, at that table, in front of all her friends, I had spoken the loudest sentence of my life without saying a word. The envelope had been my voice, sharper than any argument, more final than any confrontation. I got in the car and drove with no destination in mind, just the open road stretching ahead. The city slowly gave way to quiet suburbs, then to open fields and the long horizon. The phone buzzed again, then finally went silent. I glanced at it once, then turned it off completely. There was nothing left in those calls for me, nothing left to hear. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Not because it was easy, not because it didn't hurt, but because it was honest. She had wanted a new beginning, and now she had one. So did I. And in that moment, as the road unfolded before me and the sunlight poured through the windshield, I understood something I had been blind to for far too long. Silence can be the most powerful answer of all. If you've stayed with me until the end, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment below. Tell me, if you were sitting at that table, what would you have done?